The little boy bit the deputy so hard the man cursed and dropped him, and that was when Owen Rourke stepped through the courthouse door with half the basin still dried white on his boots. The room had the stale heat of a place where people made decisions about other people and called it order. A coal stove clicked in the corner. Wet wool, old ink, horse sweat, lye soap. The boy who had done the biting landed on both feet, snatched up his sister's hand, and backed himself in front of the smallest child, as if 9 years old were enough to stop the world from taking any more from him. At the table beside the sheriff stood a woman in a plain brown dress with one sleeve rolled to the elbow where flour had dried on her forearm. She was broad through the shoulders, too tired to stand pretty, and so still in the face that all her fear had gone down into the fingers. She kept pressing flat against the table to stop them trembling. Sheriff Eli Gage looked up from a form. "You're late, Rourke." Owen shut the door behind him. Road washed out by Miller's Crossing. The woman turned. Her eyes landed on him once, weighed him, and found no immediate use for him. That was fair. He was a rangy man in a dust-dark coat with a scar at his jaw and the kind of quiet that often got mistaken for indifference. He did not offer apologies. He did not waste motion. He only walked to the table and laid down a folded letter, soft at the creases from being read too many times on too many nights. "I came for Daniel Mercer's family," he said. At that, the little girl nearest the stove lifted her face. She could not have been more than 5. Her hair had been tied in 2 uneven plaits by somebody who had tried hard and failed. She had the dry, stunned look children get when grief has made the world too large to understand. If you're listening tonight from a kitchen with something simmering on the stove, or a chair by the window, or the far side of the world where the hour is gentler than it is here, tell me where you're hearing this from. It always matters, somehow, to know how far a story traveled before it reached a heart. Sheriff Gage broke the seal and skimmed the letter again, though the paper already held his thumbprint in 3 places. "We all know what it says. Mercer asked you, if anything happened to him, to see after his wife's sister and the children. Trouble is, asking and the law aren't the same thing." The woman finally spoke. "The law had no trouble burying my sister and her husband on the same morning and calling the rest efficient." Her voice was low and rough-edged from crying where no one could hear it. Owen looked at her properly then, not for prettiness, for damage, for endurance, for the kind of woman who had already spent all she had and still stood upright because children were watching. "This is Miss Mara Bell," the sheriff said, though it was plain neither of them much cared for introductions now. "Aunt to the children. Takes in sewing, baking, laundry. Lives in 2 rooms behind Mrs. Penwell's boarding house. County board says she can keep 1 child with bond. Maybe 2, if she had proper room and money enough to prove feed through winter. She has neither." Across the room, seated with one ankle balanced over the other as if this were church social entertainment, Gideon Shaw removed his gloves finger by finger. He was a handsome man in the polished way some snakes look polished. Silver watch chain, black broadcloth coat, hair combed straight back from a high, dry forehead. He ran the biggest cattle operation in 3 counties and sat on the county board besides. People like him never raised their voices. They simply arranged the furniture of other people's lives until no one remembered it had ever stood any other way. "I did offer a practical remedy," Shaw said mildly. "The boy is old enough to work toward his keep. The eldest girl could go to my sister in Laramie. The little one—" "No," Mara said. She did not say it loudly. She did not need to. The child by the stove had crept to her skirt and wrapped both hands in the cloth, as if even hearing herself spoken of by strangers might float her away. Sheriff Gage rubbed the back of his neck. "Rourke, I can approve temporary ward papers for 2 minors into a bachelor household. 2. That's the statute. There are 3 children. Miss Bell cannot lawfully take the others without bond she hasn't got. I don't like it, but liking isn't the question." The older girl, 12, perhaps, lifted her chin with a stiffness that belonged to adults. "We won't be split." Nobody answered her. That was the cruelest part of those rooms. Silence often came dressed as reason. Owen glanced at the children, then at Mara Bell. There were flour streaks on her cuff, a burn mark on the heel of one hand, a missing button at her throat that had been repaired with thread too dark for the dress because dark thread was what she had. He knew women like that. They spent themselves on what could be mended and called nothing their own unless forced. Gage cleared his throat. "You can only take 2. The room did not seem to breathe after that. Wind touched the courthouse windows with a dry rattle. Somewhere outside, a wagon tongue knocked wood on wood. Owen turned his head toward Mara. "Then I won't be taking 2, he said. "I'll be taking all 4, if Miss Bell can bear the look of me at her table." Even Shaw stopped with one glove half folded in his hand. Mara stared at Owen as if he had spoken in some language just adjacent to English. The older girl's mouth came open. The boy blinked once and forgot to be angry. Sheriff Gage's pen rolled from his fingers and left a black mark across the order sheet. "You're proposing," the sheriff said, "because a man sometimes says the plain thing when the plain thing feels least believable. I'm solving your arithmetic." "You don't know me," Mara said. "No," Owen said, "but I knew Daniel Mercer. He once rode 40 miles for me in a whiteout when I'd been fool enough to break through river ice alone. Men don't write letters like his unless they've run out of every other hope first." Shaw rose smoothly. "This is absurd." Owen did not look at him. "Likely. Still true." Mara's throat moved. Her eyes had gone bright, but no tears fell. There are women who cry as an act of relief, and women who learn too young that tears invite witnesses they cannot afford. She was the second kind. "You mean for an afternoon?" she asked. "Long enough to satisfy his papers?" "I mean for however long it takes to keep them together. No lies told that needn't be. No hand laid on you without your leave. My name, my work, whatever I can build. That's what I've got to offer." Shaw gave a short laugh that held no amusement. "And where does Mr. Rourke imagine he'll house a wife and 3 children? In the saddle roll behind his cantle?" "I have Mercer's upper place on Cottonwood," Owen said. That shifted the room again. Even Gage looked up sharp. Daniel Mercer's upper place had once been 40 stubborn acres of creek grass, 1 spring, a weather-gray house, and a barn with a sag in the roof. Not rich land. Good enough, if a man worked like winter was already in the yard. "You bought it?" the sheriff asked. Owen shook his head. "Mercer signed it over 2 years ago against money I never called due. I came to give it back." The boy beside Mara stared at him hard now, suspicion grappling with hope. "Why?" Owen met the child's eyes. "Because your uncle asked. Because your father once kept me alive. Because I'm tired of Graves deciding everything." That was more words than he had given anyone in months. He felt them on his tongue like rust. Mara looked at the children. The oldest girl had gone pale with wanting. The boy stood set as a fence post, waiting to throw himself at the nearest threat. The little one pressed her cheek into Mara's skirt and did not speak at all. "What are their names?" Owen asked quietly. "Josie," Mara said, touching the eldest shoulder. "Caleb. Ruth." He nodded once, as if committing them to memory were already a duty. "If you say no, I'll still take the 2 I'm allowed and fight for the 3rd till somebody out-stubborns the law. But if you say yes, we leave together." No grand speech came. No violins from heaven. Just a woman in a hot courthouse with flour on her cuff and 3 children gathered to her like storm birds, deciding whether pride fed better than love. "All right," Mara said. Shaw moved first. "Think carefully, Miss Bell. Cottonwood carries debt. Your brother-in-law owed me for feed, seed, and ditch repair. The note comes due in 6 weeks. Marry this drifter if you like. You'll only be sharing the loss." Mara turned her head at that, slow and deadly. "Then I suppose I'll lose among my own." Sheriff Gage shut his ledger. "I can marry you now. Territorial authority allows it." "Do it," Owen said. Gage glanced between them one last time, perhaps hoping sanity might ride in at the last minute. Instead, he took down the Bible from the shelf behind his desk. The ceremony lasted less than 2 minutes. Mara's hands were cold when he held them. Her fingers were work-rough and steady by force. When it came time to say "I do," she said it like someone stepping barefoot across a creek in March, knowing it would hurt and doing it anyway. Josie cried then, soundless at first, then all at once. Caleb turned away so no one would see his face. Ruth only stared at Owen with grave attention, as if children perhaps knew before grown people did whether a promise had bone in it. By noon the papers were signed. By 1, Mrs. Penwell had wrapped bread and cheese in a cloth for the road. By 2, half the town knew, and the other half had embellished it. A drifter had married a seamstress for 3 orphaned children and a failing creek place. That kind of news ran faster than fire on cheat grass. At the steps, Shaw descended after them, gloves back on, hat brim shading the irritation around his mouth. 6 weeks, he said to Owen. After that, I call the note and take Cottonwood proper. Owen settled the children into the wagon seat. Then you'd best come ready to prove it. Shaw's smile thinned. I always do. That was the moment the day tipped from desperate into permanent. The horse started forward. The courthouse receded behind them. Mara Bell, now Mara Rourke on paper if nowhere yet in feeling, sat on the wagon bench with her new husband's coat folded over Ruth's knees and the town staring at her back. She did not look around. Some lives break with noise. Others change shape so quietly you only understand what happened once the old road has already disappeared behind you. The house at Cottonwood leaned a little to the west, as if all the prevailing weather in Wyoming had come from that direction and the house had learned, by degrees, to bear with it. They reached the place near sundown. The creek gave off a mineral coolness. Sage warmed in the last light. There was a cut in the fence line where somebody had not repaired storm damage since spring, and the barn roof had indeed sagged enough to make a careful man think about snow load 3 months before the first hard frost. Caleb saw it all with the swift, betrayed attention of a boy measuring whether hope had lied to him again. Josie noticed the lilac bush by the porch gone half wild, and the cracked blue pitcher left upside down on the step. Mara noticed the chimney leaning a fraction and the softness in the kitchen threshold where rot had begun. Owen noticed where work could start. He lifted their bedrolls first. Bread next. Water pail. Then, without asking, he set Mara's sewing basket on the kitchen table as if some part of the room had been waiting for exactly that wait. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old pine, mice, and the faint ghost of peppermint soap. Daniel Mercer's last months had been visible everywhere. A bridle half-mended, seed ledger open on a shelf, a cuff nail hammered into the wall for no reason anyone living could explain. Grief lived differently in a house than in a graveyard. In a graveyard, it stayed put. In a house, it hid inside ordinary objects and came up under your feet. I'll make the stove draw, Owen said. Mara set down her bag. You don't have to keep talking like each sentence owes interest. He looked at her then, not offended, only surprised. How would you like me to talk? Like a man who plans to sleep under the same roof a while. He considered it. All right. That was the beginning, though none of them knew it yet. The first 3 days passed in work so plain it kept sorrow from becoming the only thing in the room. Owen reset hinges, hauled water, patched fence, and pulled a dead badger from under the porch before it could sour the place. Mara scrubbed cupboards, boiled linens, aired mattresses, and found enough beans, flour, and salt pork in the pantry to make the week feel survivable. Josie swept with an anger that left no corner unswept. Caleb shadowed Owen with fierce, unwanted devotion. Ruth carried clothespins in both fists and set them down one by one wherever adults most needed not to step. On the 4th morning, Owen rode down to the south pasture and came back with a jaw so tight Mara could see it from the yard. What is it? Headgate at the creek's been narrowed. By washout. He looked at her. By shovel. She went cold from the inside out. Shaw's lower range drank from the same creek farther down. On paper the rights were shared by season and depth. In practice, the man with the broadest shoulders and the most hired hands usually defined reason. Can you open it? I can. He glanced at Caleb, who was close enough to hear. Question is what happens next. The easy choice sat plain between them. Take Shaw's earlier offer, split the children, sell the place, put a hard year behind them before winter finished what grief began. The harder one meant turning a paper marriage into a working household under pressure from a richer man with friends on every board that mattered. Mara knew which choice she wanted him to make. She hated herself a little for needing him to make it. At breakfast, he told the children he was riding to the south gate. Will there be trouble? Josie asked. Yes, he said. Mara nearly smiled despite herself. No false comfort. No swollen heroics. Just truth laid down where people could step over it if they chose. Then don't go alone, Caleb blurted. Owen tore a biscuit and dragged it through sorghum. I won't. He looked at Mara when he said it. Not past her. At her. It did a small dangerous thing inside her chest. They rode together to the gate with spades in the wagon and the dry smell of August in their noses. Shaw was already there, boots clean, horse polished, 2 hands flanking him like punctuation. Water ticked through the narrowed gate in a thread meaner than a stingy man's charity. Morning, Shaw said. I had my men improve the flow. You're welcome. Shared right, Mara said. Half depth through Mercer's uppercut on odd weeks. Shaw smiled faintly. Miss Bell, Mrs. Rourke, if we're all committed to the pageant, those rights rested partly on ditch maintenance your brother-in-law never finished paying for. Owen dismounted. Then we'll settle maintenance. Open it. I'm protecting my investment. Your investment sits upstream starving. Shaw's gaze went to Mara, and there was something in it she had seen before in storekeepers and landlords and church women with good hats. The settled belief that a person's desperation eventually made them reasonable. You needn't do this the hard way. Come back to town. Bring the children. Let me arrange placements that feed them. Sell me Cottonwood while the note still allows decent terms. Mara stepped down from the wagon. Her boots sank in the wet margin by the ditch. My sister is buried on that rise behind the house. Yes, Shaw said. And land does not care. No, she answered. Men do. He held her stare a beat too long, then turned from her as if the matter bored him. That did it. Not the threat. The dismissal. Owen put the spade into the earth. One of Shaw's men moved. Shaw lifted a hand, restraining him. Dirt thudded aside. Water rushed louder. Mara took the second spade and widened the cut with 3 hard strokes. Mud chilled through her skirts. Her heartbeat sat hot in her throat. Shaw watched the whole thing without raising his voice. You're choosing a costly sort of pride, he said. Owen straightened. No, we're choosing to stay. That afternoon 2 neighbors came by, one after the other, each carrying a different shape of opinion. Mrs. Peavy from the next spread up arrived with a crock of rabbit stew and the news that half the town thought Mara had trapped a drifter and the other half thought the drifter had married into debt for pity or idiocy. She was a narrow woman with elbows like knitting needles and a habit of squinting at people as if truth improved under pressure. Either way, she said, setting the crock down, I brought supper. Folks can talk on their own time. An hour later, Reverend Sloane came with a Bible under one arm and 3 warnings under the other. He spoke of appearances, legal challenges, and the danger of building a household on haste. Mara thanked him for his concern and did not invite him past the porch rail. By evening, the children had heard enough whispers to become quiet in the wrong way. Josie folded laundry too carefully. Caleb kicked at the water trough until his toe bled. Ruth crawled under the kitchen table and would not come out until Mara sat on the floor with her, skirts spread around the child like a tent. That night, after the children slept and the lamp hummed soft over the table, Mara found Owen on the back step mending a halter with cord from his saddlebag. The night had turned cool. Crickets worked the dark grass. Far off, a coyote called with that lonely upward break that always sounded to Mara like something half prayed and half accused. You had easier ways out, she said. He kept threading the line through leather. I know. Shaw would pay good money for your help on the autumn drive. He asked. She looked at him sharply. When? In town. Before we left. He pulled the knot tight with his teeth. Said I could ride point for him, sleep warm, draw wages enough to start over somewhere dry. And he said the boy would make a decent hand in a year or 2 if he learned obedience young. Mara sat down 1 step below him. The wood held the day's warmth at her back. That was the easy path. It was the paid one. He handed her the halter without seeming to notice he had done it. She turned it in her lap, feeling where the cord disappeared through the worn leather throat. His repair work was plain, almost ugly, but it would hold. What made you say no? He shrugged once. I've spent enough of my life taking work that cost more than it paid. She was silent a moment. Then, because her hands needed occupation when her heart did not know its place, she reached for the torn cuff of his shirt lying beside him and drew out the needle she kept tucked into her sleeve. He watched as she bent her head to the cloth, the lamplight from the kitchen catching in the loose strands of hair at her neck. My mother used to say, Mara murmured, what holds isn't always what shows. He looked at her hands. The stitch line was small, neat, unshowy, strong. For a long beat, he said nothing. Then, in that same quiet, did she stay? Mara smiled without humor. No, but she was right about thread. The smile touched him deeper than if she had wept. He leaned back against the post and let the night come on around them. When she finished the cuff, she set the shirt beside him and went in without another word. But something in the house had shifted. Not safety. Not yet. Only the first narrow plank laid across a place both of them had assumed they would go on falling through. The next week proved how expensive a single decent choice could become. Shaw filed notice with the county that the Cottonwood transfer from Daniel Mercer to Owen Rourke had been executed under disputed debt. Then he filed another challenging the ward papers on grounds that the marriage had been undertaken to evade county placement. Sheriff Gage rode out to serve both notices with a face like a man carrying his own bad weather. "I'm obliged to post them," he said, nailing one sheet to the porch post. "Hearing in 10 days. Note comes due in 15. Does he ever do one thing when two cruelties will fit in the same envelope?" Mara asked. The sheriff almost smiled. "Not that I've seen. He stayed long enough for coffee. Long enough to watch Owen split kindling with 3 clean strokes and Caleb follow him like a pup determined never again to love something that might leave." Before he rode off, Gage said, very low, "For what it's worth, Miss Bell, most men who marry for convenience don't patch school slates or move their blanket to the floor so frightened children can have the bed." Mara looked toward the window. Owen was inside, showing Ruth how to coax a shy flame from newspaper twists and cedar shavings. He did not know he was being watched. That seemed important. At the end of the 10th day, when the sky hung white with heat and even the flies sounded tired, Mrs. Peavy brought an old county almanac and Josie brought the last of Daniel's ledgers from a trunk in the shed. Mara spread both open across the kitchen table. Numbers steadied her the way some women used hymns. They were honest, when written by honest hands. She began lining dates against deliveries, feed against rainfall, ditch expense against acreage. Twice she stopped and started again. By lamplight, the inconsistency showed itself at last. 3 entries in the note copied with a heavier hand than the rest, and a charge for timber never delivered because the mill receipt on the page before listed flood closure that same week. When Owen came in from the barn, sweat dried white at his collar, she pushed the ledger toward him. He patted it. "You sure? I'd stake flour on it. Maybe more." He bent over the figures. The room smelled of stew, ink, damp wool, and horse liniment. Mara watched him read. He moved slowly through numbers, not because he was dull, but because he took care with anything that mattered. She liked that against her will. "Can it save us?" he asked. "Not alone. It proves a lie, not the truth that should sit in its place." He tapped the margin. "Then we find the rest." Outside, dusk lowered purple over the creek. Josie called the others in to wash. Caleb came with his palms black from axle grease, and Ruth held a chick against her chest so gently the bird seemed charmed past fear. And maybe that is the question sitting at the edge of this story now, when the hard thing is already costing more than anyone said it would. When doing right begins to endanger the very people you meant to protect, do you loosen your grip and call it wisdom, or do you keep hold and trust that truth can outlast a stronger man's money? By sunrise the storm had arrived, though not from the sky. One of Shaw's calves turned up in Cottonwood's north draw, wearing Mercer paint over Shaw's brand. 2 of Shaw's hands rode straight to the house with accusation already sharpened. Caleb went white because boys who lose fathers young always suspect the world will next call them thieves. Owen stepped between the child and the men before either could speak twice. "We didn't touch your calf," he said. The taller hand spat in the dust. "Funny where it wandered then." "Funny," Owen agreed. They rode off promising complaint. Mara wanted to rage. Owen wanted to saddle at once and ride the whole line till he found the cut fence or the driven track proving what had happened. Instead, he did the harder thing and stayed to finish loading the wagon for town, because the hearing on the debt challenge sat that afternoon, and if he missed it, Shaw would win by absence before the facts ever took breath. Town smelled of sun-baked plank and hot iron. The hearing was held in the rear room of the Mercantile because the courthouse roof was under repair and Dry Creek believed all civic life could be run from whatever building held the straightest chairs. Men filled the back wall, hats in hand. Women leaned from the doorway pretending to pass by slowly. Shaw stood at one end of the table with a lawyer from Casper whose cuffs were too white for any honest county business. Mara laid her ledgers down at the other. Owen stood beside her. The children waited on a bench with Mrs. Peavy, who had armed herself with knitting needles and the look of a woman prepared to stab any statute that came too near. Shaw's lawyer argued for him. Owen's transfer was suspect. The marriage opportunistic. The ward papers temporary. Shaw's note valid. Mercer's obligations clear. Then Mara rose. She was not a practiced public speaker. That helped her. She wasted no time sounding important. She merely opened the ledger and walked the room through dates, drought, lumber closure, seed delivery, headgate work that never occurred, and sums added in a darker ink after Daniel Mercer lay 3 months in the ground. Her voice gathered force not from performance, but from certainty. Men who had entered the room expecting to hear from Owen found themselves leaning toward Mara instead. "This charge," she said, pressing one blunt fingertip to the page, "claims Mr. Shaw's mill sent cottonwood planks to Cottonwood Creek on May 9th. The mill ledger I borrowed from Mr. Hargis states the mill yard was under flood and no wagon crossed that road for 5 days. This charge here bills for 8 hired men on the lower ditch when Mr. Pike, whose land borders that same ditch, buried his wife that week and hired no one. Ask him. He's sitting right there." Every head turned. Pike, a sorrowful rancher in the second row, cleared his throat and nodded once. The room shifted. Not enough to win. Enough to unsettle. Shaw did not lose his temper. That made him dangerous. "Mrs. Rourke is diligent," he said smoothly. "But diligence is not proof against debt. Even if the sum is overstated, the note remains. Cottonwood still stands poor security for any county's welfare." Sheriff Gage, seated to one side, frowned into the papers. "I'll postpone ruling 3 days while filings are checked." 3 days? Mara said. "That places our life. And if I rule wrong in haste," Gage answered, not unkindly, "it becomes someone else's forever." That should have been the day's worst. It wasn't. They reached the north pasture near sundown and saw smoke before they saw flame. Not a storm cloud anywhere. Only blue sky, hard light, and a black smear rising where dry grass met the barn line. Owen was off the wagon before the wheels stopped. The smell hit next. Burnt sage, hot pitch, the animal terror of singed hair. Caleb screamed that the mare was still in the lean-to. Josie ran for buckets. Ruth stood frozen in the yard, eyes enormous in a face gone colorless. "Get the children to the creek," Owen shouted. Mara did not argue. That was one of the first things she had learned about him. He never raised his voice for his own comfort, only when time had run out. She seized Ruth with one arm, shoved Josie toward the pails, and ordered Caleb to the pump. The barn roof popped like gunfire. Heat punched outward. Owen disappeared into the smoke. Fire shortens the world. It leaves no room for reflection, only choice. Bucket. Throw. Run. Back again. Caleb coughed so hard, he went to his knees. Mara slapped his shoulder blades once and thrust another bucket at him. Josie's braid came loose and whipped soot across her face. The mare kicked free through a side panel, wild-eyed and burning at the mane. For one terrible second Mara thought Owen had not come back out. Then he emerged bent nearly double under the weight of a man. Not one of theirs. Nate Lusk, Shaw's foreman. Owen half-dragged, half-carried him clear, and let him drop in the dirt beyond the well. Lusk's trouser leg smoked at the calf. His face was white under soot. He stared up at Owen with the dazed shame of a man rescued by someone he had come to harm. "You," Mara breathed. Later, Owen said. There was blood along his sleeve. A bee must have glanced him. He did not look down. He turned back, toward the barn. "Don't," Mara said. He stopped, just once, in the space between one danger and another. His eyes met hers through smoke. In that brief stillness, both of them understood the same thing. If a child cried out from inside, he would go anyway. "Caleb," Josie shrieked. The boy had broken from the bucket line and sprinted toward the side shed. Not for himself. For the carved wooden horse his father had made him the winter before he died. Grief makes fools of the brave by convincing them that if one more small object is lost, the dead will be too. Owen caught him 3 strides from the flame front and flung him sideways into the dirt. Fire ran the grass fence with a sound like paper tearing by the mile. Mara hit the ground over both of them just as sparks poured past. Heat laid its whole burning hand across the back of her neck. When the gust passed, she rolled and saw Ruth standing by the house, not crying, only pointing with rigid urgency toward the tack room wall. "The red one," the little girl whispered. It was the first sound any of them had heard from her since the funeral. Mara did not think. She ran. Not into the main blaze. Only to the tack room where smoke banked lower and the leather smell bit the back of her throat. Red saddle. Daniel's old trail saddle, hanging furthest from the door. She dragged it down. Something thudded inside the lining. She slashed the seam with Owen's pocket knife from the peg by the jamb and pulled free an oilskin roll tied in baling cord. Then the far beam gave way. She barely reached the yard before the tack room caved in with a roar that sent a spray of sparks high as crows. Owen was there, one arm around Caleb, the other raw-burned from wrist to elbow. He took one look at the oilskin in her hands and understood it mattered. "What is it?" "Don't know." "Then keep it." By full dark the barn was half gone, the lean-to gone entire, one mare singed, two hens dead, and every breath in Mara's chest scraping like sandpaper. Nate Lusk sat against the pump house wrapped in a wet blanket, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Ruth had not spoken again. Caleb clutched his carved horse and shook where he stood. Owen finally sank onto the chopping block because his legs decided for him. Sheriff Gage arrived in Moonrise with 2 deputies and a face already hardened for the worst reading of things. Shaw rode beside him, immaculate except for dust on his cuffs. He looked at the blackened barn, the cut fence beyond, the rescued foreman, the frightened children, and took in the scene with a speed that would have impressed Mara if it had not disgusted her. "There's been accusation of stock tampering and now arson," he said. "Until this is sorted, I'm placing the property under county hold." "County hold?" Mara's voice came out strange from smoke. "On our land." Shaw spoke before Gage could. "On disputed land." Owen rose too fast and swayed once. "Say what you came to say plain." Gage swallowed. He looked tired suddenly, older than the badge. "Auction order at first light unless valid counterproof is filed in town before dawn. And, Owen, if Shaw presses charges, I may have to take you in till testimony's heard." The night seemed to narrow around that. Mara looked at the oilskin packet in her hands. Owen looked at her looking at it. Somewhere beyond the ruined barn a calf bawled for its mother in a voice so thin it might have been coming from another world. "What's in the roll?" he asked. She untied it with fingers gone stupid. Inside lay Daniel's duplicate receipts, a survey copy, and a folded sheet in his blunt hand explaining that Shaw had tried twice to buy the spring and once to bill Mercer for repairs on a ditch cut entirely below Cottonwood's line. At the bottom Daniel had written, "If anything happens, don't let Mara trust the note without checking the survey against the county map." Shaw's counting on folks being too tired to read. Mara lifted her eyes. "Dawn. Town. Proof. Burned house. Injured man. Children. Sheriff. Shaw. The whole world hanging by paperwork and stamina." "I'm riding in," she said. Owen's face did not change, but something in it tightened with fear. He did not speak. "You've breathed too much smoke. And you're half-cooked on one side. I can go." "No. If he moves on the children while I'm gone, they'll need you here." Gage looked from one to the other. "Mrs. Rourke, the clerk opens at 6. Then I'll be there at 6. What stopped the room? If a dark yard with 6 breathing souls and a burning barn can still be called a room, was not the danger anymore. It was the fact that the woman everyone had spent 2 weeks underestimating had already picked up the weight and put it on her own shoulders. She saddled before anyone could argue further. Ruth came to the stirrup and touched the hem of Mara's scorched skirt with 2 fingers, then pressed those fingers to the oilskin packet as if blessing it. Owen stood close enough for her to feel the heat of his burned arm through the night chill. "If he presses arrest?" she asked. "I'll wait." "If you have to choose between keeping the place and keeping the children?" His answer was immediate. "Children." She nodded once because there was nothing kinder to say. Then she put her boot in the stirrup and rode into the dark toward a town that might already have decided what kind of ending people like them were allowed. When Mara reached Dry Creek, dawn lay thin and gray along the eaves. Her throat hurt. Her eyes felt lined with ash. She tied off at the clerk's office and nearly fell on the step because her knees had turned unreliable sometime in the last 6 miles. The county clerk, Mrs. Haviland, was a widow with steel spectacles and the personal righteousness of a woman who had buried 3 men named superior to her and outlasted them all. She opened the office, took one look at Mara's scorched hem and blackened hands, and said, "Come in before you drop." By 8, the survey map was unrolled, Daniel's duplicates matched against county filings, and 2 alterations in Shaw's copy sat plain enough that even a sleepy deputy could see them. By 9, Nate Lusk, brought in by Gage after spending the night with the guilt he had earned, admitted Shaw had sent men to pressure Cottonwood off the creek and that the fire had started when one of them lit a burn line to run the Rourke's cattle north. Meant to scare, not kill. As if intention could unchar a barn. None of it ended matters. Not yet. It only bought them a hearing and an afternoon. Mara rode back to Cottonwood in the hard noon light, with legal delay in one pocket and certainty nowhere. She found Owen on the porch, burned arm dressed badly with a strip of flour sack, Caleb beside him whittling fury into a stick, Josie asleep upright in a chair from having been brave too long, and Ruth curled under his uninjured hand like something that had finally chosen where it meant to stay. He stood when he saw Mara, and the relief on his face was so naked it made her stop at the gate. "Well," he asked, "we have till tomorrow." He exhaled, not quite laughter, not quite prayer. The quiet after disaster is never truly quiet. It ticks, it drips, it carries the ache back into the body one nerve at a time. That evening, after Mrs. Peavy took the children to her place for supper and Sheriff Gage rode Nate Luskin to town for statement, Cottonwood settled into that tender, ragged stillness that comes when the danger has stepped out of the room but left its coat behind. Mara heated water. Owen sat at the kitchen table because standing had become a losing argument. The burn on his forearm was ugly, angry red at the edges, blanched white at the center where the beam had kissed deepest. He watched her gather salve, linen, scissors, and the bottle of laudanum Mrs. Peavy had insisted on leaving. The stove breathed out warmth. Outside, the ruined barn still smoked in one black corner. Inside, peppermint and beeswax slowly overcame it. "This'll hurt," Mara said. "I know." She unwound the flour sack strip. He did not flinch until the wet cloth touched the worst of it. Then his breath caught, quick and sharp, and she felt an answering pain through her own ribs just from hearing it. "You can cuss," she said. "Waste of language." She almost laughed, which surprised both of them. For a while there was only the small work of tending. Cloth, salve, fresh bandage, the closeness of breathing, the rough grain of the table beneath Owen's free hand. Then Mara said, without looking at him, "Who was she?" He went still. Mara kept winding the bandage. A man doesn't spend years talking as if every word costs blood unless he left a grave still trying to collect. The kitchen settled around the question. If he lied, she would know. If he told the truth, something between them would cross a line neither law nor paper had drawn. "My wife," he said at last. "Anna. Baby girl besides. Winter camp outside Rollins. Fever took the child quick. Anna slower." He swallowed once. "Doctor might have reached us if I'd turned back from a cattle job 2 days sooner. I stayed because the pain mattered and because I thought there was still time. By the time I got home, time had made other plans." Mara tied off the bandage carefully. "That wasn't murder." "No," he looked at the table. "But it was a choice. And I've heard it every day since." She set the cloth down and leaned her palms on the wood. Her own reflection trembled in the kettle lid hanging by the stove. "My sister Lucy married Daniel because he could make a room feel lighter just by entering it," she said. "People said I was the steady one, the useful one, the one you trusted with keys and ledgers and sick beds. That sounds kind until you learn what it leaves out. Nobody asks the useful woman if she's lonely. They just hand her one more thing to carry." Owen lifted his head. "When Lucy died," Mara went on, "I thought perhaps that was all my life would ever be. Carrying children, bread, grief, everyone else's undone seams. Then you walked into a courthouse and made yourself another weight I had no business wanting." His mouth opened, closed. He had not expected wanting to enter the conversation. It frightened him more than fire had. She sat down across from him. Her fingers were still damp from the salve jar. "Look at me, Owen." He did. "You don't have to come in whole," she said softly. "Most things that last were mended first." The words hung there between them, simple as thread, strong as wire. He stared at her with the helpless concentration of a man hearing something he had needed for so long he had stopped naming the need. His good hand moved once over the tabletop, then stopped, as if asking from a distance it did not yet dare close. Mara covered it with her own. And if something in you loosened just hearing that, if you know the feel of kindness arriving so late it almost hurts on contact, then you know what sat in that kitchen beside the cooling stove. That is the sort of truth people come back for, the kind that earns a quiet like and a subscription not out of habit, but because some stories leave you steadier than they found you, and you want a place that keeps doing that. He turned his hand and held hers fully then, not like a bargain, not like gratitude, but like a man testing whether the world might yet contain one gentle thing he had not ruined by touching it. They did not kiss. Not then. Tenderness has its own courage, and sometimes the more honest act is restraint. Later, when Sheriff Gage returned with Nate's signed statement, he also brought a small iron box recovered from the foreman's saddlebag. Inside were Shaw's spare notes, cash, and a canceled lien on an unrelated widow's place up north that he had not yet filed off the books. Gage set it on the table. Nate says Shaw paid the men from this. If that helps establish intent, it may matter tomorrow. His eyes flicked to the cash. And if a person were less scrupulous than you, Owen, I suppose some of this might vanish before evidence was counted. Owen looked in the box once, then shut the lid. Take what proves your case. Return the rest. Gage lifted an eyebrow. After what he's cost you, only thing I want from Gideon Shaw is what's mine. The sheriff said nothing, but Mara saw the change register in him. Not admiration exactly. Something more durable. Measurement revised. When he had gone, she stood in the doorway and watched Owen move to the porch. Moonlight silvered the black ribs of the ruined barn. He leaned his shoulder against the post, careful of the bandaged arm. She went to stand beside him. Their silence had grown less crowded by then. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. You realize if we win, Dry Creek will spend 10 years saying I trapped you. He glanced down at her, and there was the beginning of warmth at the edge of his mouth. Let them work for their entertainment. She looked out toward the rise where Lucy and Daniel were buried under stones Caleb kept free of weeds. And if we lose, we don't split them. It was not a vow made for heroics, only fact. Yet Mara felt it settle under her ribs like a second heartbeat. Something between them had changed permanently in that burned, patched, smoke-scented house. Not to safety. The world still watched. Shaw still had money. Morning still intended to test them. But the place where duty ended and choice began had grown visible at last, and both of them had stepped over it. The crowd at the final hearing overflowed the mercantile by noon the next day, not because Dry Creek loved justice more than gossip, but because justice with witnesses felt nearly as satisfying. Shaw came in composed. That was his great talent. Men like him mistook self-command for innocence because it had gotten them through so many rooms before. He wore a fresh coat, fresh gloves, fresh confidence. Only the pulse in his temple gave him away. Mrs. Haviland sat beside Sheriff Gage with county books open. Nate Lusk waited near the wall, hat crushed between both hands, looking like a man who would rather face a kicking horse than his own testimony. Mara stood with her ledgers and Daniel's oilskin packet. Owen stood at her shoulder, bandaged arm hidden poorly beneath his coat. Josie and Caleb sat in the front row with Ruth between them, each child scrubbed and solemn as Sunday. Mrs. Peavy had taken command of the entire bench by the simple force of arriving early and disapproving loudly at anyone who challenged her claim. Gage called the matter. Mrs. Haviland presented the survey discrepancy first. The spring sat wholly within the Mercer tract. Shaw's ditch repair assessment had been charged beyond legal line. Then Mara walked them again through the dates and numbers, only more calmly now. Proof gathers strength the second time when it knows the room has heard it. Shaw's lawyer tried to object, tried to cloud, tried to turn arithmetic into personality. Mrs. Haviland shut him down by producing the county map with her own annotations from 12 years prior. Pike testified no labor had been hired on the burial week. Hargis from the mill testified no lumber crossed during flood closure. The room grew quieter with each man who preferred accuracy to alliance. At last Nate Lusk stepped forward. He did not look at Shaw. Mr. Shaw told us to ride the line hard, he said. Said the marriage was a sham, and if Cottonwood looked unworkable the county'd settle it clean. We cut the fence and pushed one of Mr. Shaw's calves through the north draw. Fire was meant for the grass edge only. Wind caught faster than we reckoned. Shaw turned then, very slightly, like a man hearing his own floorboards begin to crack. You expect this room to accept the word of a foreman who set ablaze? His lawyer demanded. No, Owen said. Every head came to him. He had spoken only twice in the hearing before that. He stepped forward now with the same stillness he brought to breaking a horse or facing weather. Don't take his word alone. Take mine. Gage frowned. Owen, I found him pinned when the beam came down. He could have let me burn after what he came there to do. Instead, he warned me the back wall was going and shoved Caleb clear when I couldn't reach in time. Owen's gaze stayed on the sheriff. If you're counting men today, count full. That was the turning point. Not the evidence, though the evidence mattered. Not Nate's guilt. Not Mara's numbers. It was Owen refusing the easy cruelty even when it would have advantaged him. Rooms remember that. Communities, too. Gage looked from Owen to Nate, then to the iron box on the table, then finally to Shaw. Do you dispute the alterations in the note? Shaw took off his gloves slowly. He understood, perhaps before anyone else, that the loss had already happened in the minds of the people watching him. A rich man can survive a bad ruling. What he cannot easily survive in a small town is the moment ordinary people stop lending him their certainty. The amounts may have been adjusted pending labor valuation, he said. Any irregularity would have been clerical. By whom? Mrs. Haviland asked dryly. A ghost with your penmanship? A laugh escaped someone in the back and died at once. Shaw's mouth flattened. He could have raged. He could have lied bigger. Instead, he made the mistake proud men often make when the world resists them. He spoke the truth one shade too clearly. Mercer couldn't keep the place, he said. Bell couldn't keep the children. Rourke had no standing in this county. I offered outcomes that fed everyone. If people must be protected from their own sentiment, then sometimes arithmetic looks unkind. Mara felt the whole room hear it as one sentence. Not what he had done, what he believed. Children as quantities, women as deficiencies, homes as entries waiting to be transferred to steadier hands than their own. Sheriff Gage leaned back. There it is. He ruled Shaw's assessed note invalid pending fraud review. He restored full ward standing to the Rourke household on grounds of lawful marriage and demonstrated capacity. He ordered criminal inquiry into the fence cut and burn line. He affirmed Cottonwood's water right at original depth. Each sentence fell clean. Mara hardly heard them past the blood in her ears. Shaw's ending did not come with handcuffs that day. It came quieter and, for a man like him, perhaps worse. Pike stood and said he would no longer water through Shaw's lower ditch. Hargis muttered he'd be reviewing outstanding accounts. Reverend Sloane, who had once worried over appearances, crossed the aisle to ask Josie whether she needed new schoolbooks. One by one, the invisible loans of deference on which Shaw had lived for years were called due and not renewed. By the time he left the room, he was still wealthy, still dressed well, still unjailed. But the axis had shifted. His power had not exploded. It had begun, simply, to stop mattering. Outside, heat shimmered off the street. The children reached them first. Caleb hit Owen's good side at a run and clung hard enough to bruise. Josie threw her arms around Mara with less control than dignity. Ruth walked to Owen, touched the bandage at his wrist very gently, then laid her cheek there in a gesture so solemn and complete it nearly undid them both. Mrs. Peavy wiped her eyes and blamed dust. Mara turned to Owen. The whole town seemed to have become careful about looking directly at them, which in Dry Creek was as good as privacy. Well, she said, because after such days someone must always say something ordinary or the heart will seize under its own feelings. It seems your arithmetic held. He watched her with that quiet concentration again. Marriage papers still do. She understood him at once. Law had made the first choice. He would not let law make the second. We can part it clean, if you want, he said. No one can say you owe me more than the fight. Mara looked past him to the children arguing over who got to hold the oilskin packet now that it had become family scripture. Caleb had already started bragging to the blacksmith that Owen could lift a burning wall with one hand, which was nonsense, but useful nonsense. Josie stood taller than she had 3 weeks ago. Ruth had begun speaking in single words to the mayor and, occasionally, to God. This was the life before her. Not perfect, not easy, real. She looked back at the man who had walked into a courthouse, heard a law count children like inventory, and refused to let the number stand. I know we can part it clean, she said. I'd rather keep it true. That was when he kissed her, and because both of them had outlived the age for performance, it was not dramatic. No grabbing, no conquering, no audience gift wrapped in sighs. Only a long, tired, deeply certain kiss in the middle of a hot street that tasted faintly of smoke, coffee, and the unbelievable fact of being allowed one more good thing than either had expected. Life after that did not become storybook easy. Good stories seldom insult us that way. The barn still needed rebuilding. Owen's arm healed stiff for a month and ached whenever the weather prepared to turn. Mara took in more sewing than any sane woman should and made the house account book sing on less money than ought to have fed 5 people and livestock besides. Caleb lied once about a broken trace, and then confessed before supper because Owen's disappointment proved harder to bear than fear. Josie began reading in the evenings from borrowed novels and pretending she did not enjoy it when Mara corrected her pronunciation. Ruth learned back full sentences by autumn, though she saved most of them for animals and one or two especially trusted humans. Dry Creek, having first swallowed the story as scandal, gradually learned to live with it as proof. The same women who had once wondered aloud whether Mara Bell had trapped a husband now asked her advice on feed tallies and winter stores. Men who had doubted Owen's staying power came by under various excuses to borrow tools, return tools, discuss culverts, or merely stand in the yard and be educated by his silence. Sheriff Gage rode out twice that fall, and once in early snow, each time with less official business and more coffee appetite. Mrs. Haviland sent a letter saying the fraud inquiry on Shaw had widened into 2 counties. No one read it aloud with satisfaction, though there was some. As for Gideon Shaw, the railroad awarded its watering contract elsewhere after the survey trouble made him a risk. 2 families shifted grazing away from his south range. He remained a man of means, but means without easy reverence have a way of feeling smaller year by year. The last time Mara saw him close, at church Christmas, he inclined his head to her with the brittle courtesy of someone who had once mistaken control for destiny. She inclined hers back and felt nothing at all. By first spring thaw, the new barn frame stood straight. By June, beans climbed the kitchen trellis and the creek ran generous under Cottonwood's pale as new coin. Owen planted a row of late potatoes where Daniel had meant to put them and left the old man's cuff nail in the wall because Caleb said some things ought to remain where memory can hang from them. Mara moved her sewing table to the front window for light. Sometimes, when work was quiet and the children were outside and Owen came in carrying hay on his shoulders or Ruth asleep in one arm, she would look up and feel astonishment like a private prayer. Months later, on a September evening with the first cool edge in the wind, they ate supper on the porch because the kitchen held the day's heat. Josie read aloud from a book until Caleb complained it sounded like homework. Ruth fed carrot tops to the mare through the rail and announced solemnly that the mare preferred orange to sermons. The light went soft over Cottonwood Creek. Grasshoppers clicked in the weeds. Inside the house, the lamp waited on the table though no one yet needed it. Mara leaned against the post and watched Owen cross the yard with a bucket in one hand and the repaired red saddle in the other, carrying both as if there had never been a question about whether he belonged between them. Josie came up beside her, old enough now to understand some things, and wisely not all. "Did you know?" the girl asked. "Back at the courthouse, when he said it?" "No," Mara said. "I knew he was decent. I didn't know yet he'd stay." Josie considered that. "How can you tell?" Mara looked out over the yard where Caleb had begun, at last, to laugh without guarding the sound. "Most folks wait for love to sound like thunder. Half the time it just comes in quiet and hangs up its hat." By the time the lamp was lit, the house at Cottonwood stood gold against the deepening blue, porch crowded, supper dishes forgotten, 6 easy shadows moving warm across the curtains while the creek kept its low silver talk beyond the fence. Next time, I'll tell you about the widow who hired a one-eyed tracker to find the brother everyone said had run from the war, and what they uncovered beneath the church floor in a town that had spent 20 years burying the truth. Until then, take gentle care of your heart, and I'll meet you on the next porch light.